Thank you very much at magandang umaga mga kaibigan. Nagbabalik po ang inyong programa, ang Aksyon Central Luzon Special Edition. I'm your host, Sonny Lopez, and today we are here in the U.S. Embassy in the office of the Consul General, Consul General Mike Schimmel.
Kumusta kayang magagandang tao sa Pilipinas? I'm very pleased to be here. Nice to see you this morning, Sonny. Thanks for coming to my office.
Thank you very much. We will be having a chance to inform people from Central Luzon on things to do when they're applying for visas.
Very good. We look forward to the opportunity in this session and any other you might describe to me to share with people information about the visa process. We want it to be transparent. We want people to understand exactly what's involved. It is our hope that by knowing more about the process, they're more likely to facilitate their interviews and more likely to put out a business that people who are on the sidewalks outside of our building offering documents that aren't necessary and giving advice that's not correct. So I hope we can serve your public and mine by this session.
Yes, there's a lot of those.
There are, unfortunately.
Operating there.
Right, and people
it's
should
a big
know
industry, in fact.
People should know they need no counsel from the sidewalk. Anyone outside of the building who works for the embassy is plainly identified. We do not have people circulating on the sidewalk offering information. Do not listen to someone who says he works for the embassy if he's outside giving you advice on visas. That's not where advice on visas should be found. It's on our website, and it's a very authoritative
people, they still go to lawyers or some...
Many lawyers are completely reputable. I'm not about to suggest that the legal profession, it could not be helpful to people seeking visas, but they should not need legal counsel especially for a non-immigrant visa. That's not to suggest that the lawyers don't offer a service to people in certain categories of application. There are people going to the United States on employment-based visas, on H-1Bs, on Ls, etc., who benefit very frequently from legal counsel. But the average traveler, the person who is watching this show wondering how he can get a visa or she can get a visa to visit family and friends in the United States, should not need a lawyer. Again, not to suggest the lawyers...
Or a travel agent, for the matter.
No, well, travel agents certainly offer a service to facilitate travel to the United States. I'm not about to suggest that travel agents aren't helpful sometimes. I don't have anything to do with the actual travel industry. But as far as visas are concerned, an applicant for a non-immigrant visa typically can manage the process without legal counsel.
Okay.
And again, I repeat, I don't want to suggest that lawyers aren't helpful at different instances, but generally speaking, you don't need a lawyer to get a visa to go to Disneyland.
Well, there's some, there are several millions of Filipinos in the United States.
4 million, we
estimate. They have relatives in the Philippines. Some have not undergone education, and when they see that paper that they have to fill out,
it can be daunting. Yes,
it's daunting for them.
It can be intimidating, but we like to think that our website helps you through that paper. It's all done online now. That too is sometimes daunting.
Yes.
And what we tell the applicant who finds himself or herself intimidated by the computer, what we tell that person is to seek counsel from a teenager. Perhaps they have a son, a daughter, a nephew, or a niece who can sit next to them and help them go through the system.
But still, people, despite the fact that you've done it online, they still come back early in the morning. Before you are aware of that, you have to pay some people, so they stay in line for you.
That's unfortunate.
No more.
No, everybody who comes to this building already has an appointment.
Yes.
The wait time outside is brief. You mentioned this morning you no longer see the lines outside. The only time you'll see a line outside is before we even open, because people, for some reason, they don't believe that they're going to be allowed in at the set time that they're assigned. In fact, they can arrive for their interview 15 to 30 minutes beforehand and be guaranteed processing very quickly into the building.
On the average, how many visas do you take care daily?
Between 1,000 and 1,700 every day.
Most of those are in what category? Tourist visas?
Tourist visas. We're speaking really, that is exclusively non-immigrant visas. Non-immigrant is a category that includes anyone going to the States for a temporary purpose. In other words, not to immigrate, but to complete a stay that has a limitation. That may include, for example, a student who's going to study for several years.
Yes.
But at the end of the study, it's understood that he or she will leave and go back to their place of
residence. How about doing business?
Likewise, that's a non-immigrant visa. Someone going for a temporary purpose, a temporary business purpose, can travel on a B1, B2. That is, they go up for their short business period. For example, maybe they're attending a convention in Las Vegas. The convention lasts a week. The B1, B2. The B1 portion accommodates their need to do a little bit of business while they're in Vegas. The B2 allows them to stay for an extra week or two or a month and enjoy the sights of the United States and possibly visit family and friends and hopefully spend lots of money to help our economy.
So that's the most of the applicants are.
Most of them are B1, B2. I should add, of course, as you know, the Philippines has an enormous population abroad.
Yes.
And a good number of those Philippines working overseas are working on ships. So we have a large number of applicants for what we call seafaring visas.
Yes.
Those are C1.
They have a special lane here,
D.
right?
We have a special lane for them to get them in and out quickly because generally speaking, they're well qualified. The rate of refusal is very low. And we'd like to spend as little time as possible dealing with them so that we can deal with everyone else whose cases may be a little bit more complex. In a given year, we'll issue 40,000 visas to seafarers.
For another Filipino who wants to go to the United States on a tourist visa, he wants to go there on a temporary basis, there are certain requirements that they have to come up with. And I've heard people putting up false bank accounts, buying or titles, borrowing titles from relatives.
Yeah, because they have a misunderstanding of what's required for a visa. In fact, what you described as certain requirements, we consider it to be certain suggestions, because the essence of a non-immigrant visa is an intention, a plan, a genuine plan to spend a limited time in the United States and depart at the end of that time. So how do you demonstrate that that's true? Well, we ask you to show us what would bring you back to your country of residence. And that's where people begin to think, oh, those are the requirements. I have to demonstrate that I have a good job, that I have a solid bank account, that I have strong family connections, that I have a future here. So they put together documents that they think are required for their interview. In fact, those things may or may not be helpful, because you can have all those things.
It goes either way, right?
Well, you can have all those things, but you can still have as your intention immigrating illegally to the United States. So it is the interview that's important. And you may put together those documents which may or may not be helpful.
That's the complaint. Sometimes they bring all the papers, all the interviews, all the documents that, that is required of them,
No,
but
not required.
They don't even...
They're suggested. They're not required.
They're not also...
Again, it's the interview. Sonny, if I'm talking to you and you have a stack of papers this high, but I suspect, and in the course of your answers, you betray an intention to join your cousin at his construction firm in Kansas, then I'm going to deny your visa, even though you have these documents demonstrating connections here. The connections don't pull you back if your real target is the underground economy in the United States.
Will it help if you have relatives there or no relatives?
That can go either way. If you have relatives there, then clearly you have an obvious purpose for your travel, and you probably have accommodation, so the need to demonstrate means with which you could sustain a stay in the United States is diminished. But at the same time, the relatives may form an anchor for you there to establish a new life. So that's when we begin to ask you about your circumstances here.
And what comes out in the past, right?
It happens in the past, of course. But so what comes out in the course of the interview, maybe you describe a situation here that requires you to continue supporting your parents, for example, or you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend to whom you hope to be married soon, and the situation in the United States includes a family event that your brother hopes you can attend, and it all comes together sensibly, and we issue you the visa. Simple as that.
Will it help you any if you're young? Or is it a disadvantage you're young, you're a fresh
A lot
grad?
of people think that's a disadvantage to be young, because it's harder to show that you are compelled to return. If you're 21 years old and you're making a very modest income and you have a cousin in New York City or in California and you want to travel to the United States, it may be that the officer suspects your real intention is to immigrate, because at that point in your life there aren't a lot of compelling reasons.
There's a bias there, huh?
I'm sorry?
There's a bias there.
Well, there's a historical record. The younger traveler tends more often to stay because there are a tendency in our youth to do what the Australians call walkabout, to have an adventure, to go to the United States and stay for 6 months, a year, 2 years, maybe forever. And our job is to discern the genuine visitor from the intending immigrant. Sometimes younger people have a harder time demonstrating that they're likely to return to the Philippines. That is a genuine fact. The interviews are a little bit tougher for them. What we tell the officers, however, is to give every possible consideration to every single applicant. So let's say you're a 21-year-old and you come to the window, and of course you're a little bit intimidated because you're talking through a hard line to an American officer who sometimes seems a bit imposing, and you've never dealt with this sort of an interview situation before. What we're going to look at is not just what you describe. You're going to say, well, I'm a student at the University of the Philippines, I'm studying philosophy and literature, but my mother and father have traveled to the States several times. My brother has been to Europe a couple of times. We begin to look at the pattern and we say, you know, international travel isn't foreign to this family. This young man has a connection in the United States that'll put him up for a little while, and his program of study is continuing. maybe we can issue. We ask the officers to consider the wide circle of circumstances that might help someone
So
be
it
eligible.
helps if you've traveled, if you've been traveling.
It certainly does.
It's in your passport.
It certainly does. It certainly does. Someone whose passport includes visas from developed countries, for
Yes.
example, has demonstrated that he or she can travel to those countries and return to the Philippines because their situation here is interesting.
Sometimes those who go to the United States, as soon as they arrive, they're given some few weeks, some up to 6 months.
Most of them get 6 months. Most of them get up
That's
to
the
6
maximum,
months.
right?
That's the default. For most people, the authorized period of stay is up to 6 months. Now, how many people can spend 6 months there doing nothing? Very few. Older people, for example, who are retired. But younger people who spend 6 months in the United States generally arouse suspicion the next time they travel. Because the first thing the border officer is going to ask is, what were you doing for 6 months? And most of us can't afford to just put up our feet and watch Oprah for 6 months. Possibly that person was working illegally. And he or she would have to explain what he or she did for 6
You
months.
also study about Filipinos, how they are. Even if you don't have that much money, every relative takes care of you for about a week or 2 weeks, and then
If they can explain their circumstances, of course, there's not going to be a concern. Generally speaking, though, the younger person who spends that long idle in the United States will arouse suspicion. It's a
Yeah.
fact. Most of us can't take a vacation for
Yes.
more than 3, 4, 5 weeks.
Yes.
Again, traveling all the way to the States, you're probably going to stay several weeks. It's too far to go for a weekend or a short period. But beyond a reasonable time period, and most of us define reasonable as 4 weeks to 6 weeks, maybe even 8 weeks. But when you get into the 3rd month, the 4th month, the 5th month, you have to wonder,
Yes.
what else are they doing?
that is what you call the arousing of the suspicion from the interview.
It could generate suspicion the next day. Again, we issue visas valid for 10 years.
Yes, yes.
So suppose you're a 21-year-old and you get the visa for 10 years and you go and visit your brother once, you come back. The next time you go, you stay for 6 months. You come back. A year later, you go again. The border officer is going to say, I see you were there from August through January, the last time you traveled. What did you do in that time? Oh, I just enjoyed the sights. What sights? Well, you'd have to be able to describe how you occupied your time, because the officer is going to suspect that, in fact, your brother helped you find a job and you were paid under the table, and you're coming back this time to do the same thing. So at that point, the officer may send you into secondary for further questioning, and possibly the visa could be revoked.
Basically, they tell you that it's best to be honest,
Oh, absolutely.
very
Absolutely.
honest about what you fill out in your paper and
Absolutely.
what you're
Right.
telling.
Yeah, let me come back to the interview, because I was talking about
Yes.
the encounter at
This
the
is
border.
really very vital, the interview.
At the interview, it's incredibly critical that the person be honest, because we talk about visa denials. If we suspect that your circumstances aren't strong enough to compel you to return to this country and we deny the visa, that is a temporary setback. A year from now, perhaps you're able to describe situations here that are stronger still. Your pay is better, your future is brighter. There's more reason to believe you when you say you're going to come back. We might issue the visa the second time. But if in the first interview we suspect that you presented fraudulent information or you outright lied, then we will prevent you from being issued a visa, possibly for the rest of your life if the fraud was serious enough. And that, of course, is
It
a
happened before,
circumstance. It's happened many times. There's a category of visa ineligibility relating to fraud of a material nature, and that person could not immigrate or visit the United States for the rest of his or her life if they are in fact found ineligible because of fraud or misrepresentation, absent a waiver. There are always waivers for circumstances that are particularly challenging. But it's an incredible impediment to anyone's future to be found ineligible on the basis of fraud or misrepresentation. The truth is always the most essential factor in the issuance of a visa.
Yeah, sometimes. But how about those with language impediment?
We have at least 5 officers who speak Tagalog,
Okay.
and we have translators from, I hope, every language that comes to the window. I'm sure I'm challenged on that from time to time, but language will not be a barrier to someone's
In
eligibility.
the interview.
In the interview, right.
But sometimes there's been certain complaints that there's certain biases, or from some people doing the interview, that they just see you, they don't want you anymore.
Again, I'd have to see the
Is there some
particular
psychology? There's some
circumstance.
are they trained?
We're trained to extend every possible consideration consistent with U.S. visa law to every applicant. Now, I have to tell you that refused applicants very often will come away with the perception that the refusal was based on factor A, factor B, factor C, factor D, factor E. In fact, it's based on one premise only in 99% of the cases, and that is the officer's suspicion that the traveler will not return to the Philippines. It's not based on the applicant's race, creed, color, ethnic
but
origin.
no discrimination whatsoever.
No discrimination whatsoever.
Because we've heard in the past that, oh, you gotta be wary of this console or this window, because if you see this console or this window, 100% you're gonna be turned down.
Well, in fact, our officers rotate through. Our officers change windows.
Yes.
I'd be surprised that one window was particularly identifiable with any one officer. And again, I repeat, denied applicants come away with a perception that they might have been treated unfairly in some instances. We hope that that perception is only a perception, and we constantly review with the adjudicating officers fairness, courtesy, and professional treatment. So we hope that, in fact, there are no biases in the interview process. There certainly shouldn't be. There's no place for such. We, again, extend every possible consideration consistent with visa law to every applicant.
You said they don't have to go to lawyers, right?
That's right.
But,
they shouldn't need to.
But sometimes they have to consult with some friends or people or travel consultants on how to deal with this, because I've applied 3 times, I think, for a visa, and I see a lot of Filipinos really nervous.
Well, it's an intimidating process.
Very intimidating.
Right, right. You come in through security gates, you get screened for metal, you sit down in a very large, this is a very attractive facility now. I hope you've had a chance to take a look around. Our other facility was particularly unsightly and really kind of embarrassing as a venue for this important process. But the current building is aesthetically and functionally ideal. So I like to think people have a pleasant experience here. Nevertheless, it is intimidating. We discuss that among the officers. We do our best to disarm the candidate, the applicant, to make him feel a little more relaxed. I don't know if you'll recall your last visit here, but the process begins not only with being greeted by the people who are circulating as information offerers, the greeters we call them, and then you're called to a window where you put your fingers on a scanner so that your fingerprints are recorded, and that includes a brief conversation, which, again, we train the office. They're not officers, they're clerical staff, sometimes family members of officers. We encourage them to be polite as possible to make the person feel more relaxed. So by the time they come for the actual interview, they've already talked to several people in the building. It's not the first encounter with an embassy employee or a consular employee. And we encourage the consular officers likewise to be very conscious of the intimidation factor that exists, and it inhibits the success of the interview. So we want people to be confident and comfortable at the window.
Relax.
We want them very much to be, but again, we understand it's sometimes a very challenging wish, given the realities of.
Is there a quota reserved for Filipinos in non-immigrant visas? Is there?
No, we wish every applicant qualified. Again, we very much want to facilitate travel to the United States. It's in our country's interest. It's in your country's interest in terms of promoting a good bilateral relationship. We are a very special partnership, the United States and the Philippines. 4 million Filipinos living in the U.S., 350,000 Americans living here, a great history together.
Yes.
We want very much for Filipinos to travel to the United States.
Do you still have that special relationship?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. No, you've heard President Obama speak about it. You've heard President Aquino and Secretary Del Rosario. You've heard Ambassador Thomas echo their words. This is a very special relationship. We are pleased that we've been able to issue 3 visas out of every 4 applicants who turn up in our queue. 75% of applications are in fact processed to a successful
You're more relaxed
conclusion.
now, they say. You're more relaxed in the issuances of visas.
Well, I can't compare with what was here at X amount of months, years, whatever ago, but it is in everyone's interest that international travel be effected successfully. Our economy benefits from travelers from this country or any other.
Yes.
And we believe the bilateral relationship is strengthened when Filipinos visit the United States and when Americans come here. I'm pleased to note as well there's been a 10% increase in the number of Americans visiting this country. And as I noted in statistics I shared with you earlier, a 13 or 14% increase in the number of Americans living here because they feel very comfortable here. I think the situation here is very comfortable for Americans, and we're very pleased to see that.
Okay, we're going to have a short break.
Okay.
After the break, we will continue with the discussion. This is very interesting at very informative naman po, mga kaibigan. Marami tayong natututunan kay Conjen Mike, no? At ito, lahat ng tinatanong ko naman, sinasagot naman eh. At mabuti ho ito, mga kaibigan, para pag susunod kayo nag-apply, napanood nyo to, mas relax na kayo pagpunta nyo ho dito sa embassy kasi iba na ho ang estilo ngayon. Hindi ka mukha dati, talagang Pagpasok mo pa lang, nervous ka na. Babalik po kami pagkatapos ng short break.